The effect of tales and narratives. Question. You have published several hundred tales and narratives, mostly from the Middle East, illustrative of situations which often show strengths and weaknesses in people. Why do you export this material from other cultures, instead of producing it in current terms, and what effect is it having on the Western world, if it is not simply promoting Eastern wisdom? Answer. This material is well developed as an instructional medium in the East, so it would not be good sense to attempt to improve on it or substitute it by something which is tested and effective. Take it the other way round. People in the East do not usually try to invent radio for themselves just because it was invented in and imported from the West. The effect which our material is having in the Western world is already extensively written about by people in the West, who say that they find it useful, and I must refer you on this point to these people. Another reason why we have not been using material from the West is that until recently we have not had a homegrown product, sufficient material of this kind, to recycle. Even if we had been able to collect it, its reception, due to established patterns of disdain for narrative instruction, would not have given it a fair chance. Only after indicating its usage, vitality, and durability in certain cultures which have found it useful, could we induce people elsewhere to look for the local product and, above all, make use of it. We have had to reopen the question of the possible value of tales, stories, jokes, and narrative, and hold this door open in the face of a long-standing Western convention that such material is only of entertainment value. What has happened is that the equivalent of a technological infrastructure, or a basic literacy in this field, is being established in the West. But you should not assume, merely because you are living and studying in the West, that A. This material is intended only for the West, because it has also had a phenomenal success in the East, or that B. People in the East have not had to go through a similar retrieval and refamiliarization process to enable them to reclaim the non-entertainment content in these artifacts of their own cultures. Indeed, in the East as in the West, there are still many people who are unable to adjust to the restoration of extra and educational dimensions in the material. It is fair to say that, whereas in general the West has only recently acquired the time, energy, flexibility, and variety of curiosity to examine the materials in the manner intended by its original producers, so, again in general, the East has tended to have forgotten the attributions, depth, content, and structures in which it was traditionally presented. Sections of both communities have been coming to a fresh understanding of the materials. Sections of each remain, largely for reasons of personal insecurity and attachment to oversimplified ideologies, uninterested or hostile. It is further worth noting that much of Western religion and tradition is thoroughly saturated with Eastern tales and stories, many of them, according to Sufis, originally tales of inner meaning, now taken as literal truth or only analogy. And tales and stories are almost the only cultural phenomenon which are found as the property of all peoples of the world, not belonging, strictly speaking, to anyone. Opposition to Araby. Ibn Arabi taught through what was apparently love poetry, and people became bitterly hostile towards him. This behavior of theirs was due to their inability to understand the projection which he was using, not to the reality of their imaginings. But their suppositions about him and his work were firmly believed by them to represent the truth, to be factual in nature. In his case, he was able to teach them further by providing a commentary which satisfied them and caused them to hail him as a great mystic. But in so doing, since they had not arrived at this understanding through inward and personal perception, they were cut off from the benefits of the material's actual use within themselves. They were only intellectually and emotionally satisfied. Their perception of him was limited to a reassurance that his ideas did not conflict with their own ingrained beliefs. It is this mentality of what is in fact superficial assessment which causes the poverty of potential understanding in people who seek only explanation and not perceptions. Stories of the miraculous. Question: are the miraculous stories of the doings of Sufis literally true, or are they designed to illustrate structures equivalent to what may happen, or are they intended to make people credulous or to think in a new way? Answer: the answer is the same as the answer to such a question as, is a carrot yellow? Is it intended to give nourishment, or to propagate itself, or to make up stories about? The truth is that, under the right circumstances, all of the factors may be true, according to what use is made of them. You can use dervish tales to impress people, if they want to be impressed, or if you gain anything from such deception, and many people do actually do so. Again, the hearers can misuse them if they insist upon being impressed, or upon being cynical about them. They almost always, too, contain structures and immediate values which may be analogical, and they may be again and again repeated in actual events, which makes them literally true when they recur in their cyclical fashion. Question: can I have an example of one which you can remember as actually having happened, as well as being traditional and as representing a pattern? The King and the Woodcutter. Answer: here is one, very well known among the Afghans, and attributed nowadays to Ahmad Shah, the first king of modern Afghanistan. Ahmad Shah was crowned king with a wreath by a certain dervish, respected by all. From that time on, he often wore the dervish mantle and roamed among his subjects, seeking to improve the quality of his rule. One day he visited, in this disguise, a woodcutter living in a forest shack. "What would you do if you could not sell your wood?" he asked. "Respected dervish," said the woodcutter, "I would trust in God and find something." The next day the king had it proclaimed that no woodcutters were to be allowed into the city, and a day or two later visited the man again in his disguise. "How are you living, now that the king has taken such a strange attitude towards woodcutters?" he asked. "Well, now I make leather belts and sell them to the shops. Trusting in God, I have enough to eat." The king left him, and some time later issued an edict that no item of leather was to be sold in the shops. When Ahmad Shah visited his poor woodcutter leather belt maker again, he said, "How are you getting on, now that fate seems to be pursuing you and has stopped your new career?" "Sir," said the other man, "I trust in God and work as a market porter. All is well, and I have enough to eat." Ahmad Shah now caused all market porters to be conscripted into the palace guard, without any pay and not even to be given anywhere to sleep. That night the king went in his dervish cloak to see his friend, and found him in his hut, eating some food and whittling wood. "What are you doing?" asked the king. "I have been taken into the royal guard, but without food or anywhere to sleep," said the man. "So I have pawned the sword they issued me, bought the necessary food, and I am making a dummy sword until my future shall further be known." The king went back to his palace. The following morning the commander of the guard called the woodcutter and ordered him to behead a prisoner. They walked together to the place of execution, where the king, as was his custom, was waiting. The woodcutter did not recognize the king in his crown and royal robes, but saying, trusting in God, he drew his wooden sword and awaited the order to strike. The prisoner said, "In the name of God, may this sword refuse to cut, for I am innocent." The woodcutter dropped his sword on the ground. After an investigation, the condemned man was found to be innocent after all. Ahmad Shah was so impressed that he made this man his Grand Vizier. From that time, the Afghan kings always used before their names Al-Mutawakkil ala Allah, he who trusts in God. Emotional craving. People who are interested in the miraculous will either consume wonder tales from emotional craving, or may allow them to operate as alternative ways of thinking about things, to exercise the part of the mind which says stereotyped reactions are constricting. The automatic and emotional reactions alike are part of the secondary self, and do not represent perception of truth. Siri al-Sakati, who died in 867 of the Christian era, said, "True wisdom is non-attachment to self and devotion to truth." Continuous versus effective activity. Continuous activity, labels, a conditioned sense of importance or progress, the attainment of lesser goals on a shallow plane, these tend to be the body and bone of many a human system whose members expect much more of it than it can deliver. Since it supplies social needs, keeps people occupied and relieves strains, it is believed to be, not just that, but something of a higher order. On the other hand, the teaching method and the study which is discontinuous, which does not use the reward and punishment motif, which works with whom it can and when and where it can, the Sufi way, is regarded by the children of automatism as less fulfilling, less interesting, less attractive. It would be less important and should be less interesting if there were an alternative. That is to say, if it were possible to achieve insight, fulfillment, illumination, know yourself, higher consciousness, and so on through the mechanical organization. In such a case, there would be no need for the Sufi system. It would be irrelevant and ineffective. But these are not the alternatives. It is only when this is understood that people can approach the Sufi study and can profit from it. Until then, they are always hankering after either a system which will be revealed to them if only they will endure the confusion of the Sufis, themselves being able to force order out of what they unconsciously imagine to be the chaotic state of the Sufi projection, or something to which they can transfer which may resemble the Sufi one to them, but which offers the kind of stimuli they crave. This is no new problem, but it must be stated constantly. If it is learned, real learning outside of the straitjacket and blinkers of shallower activity can begin. But how is this done? Where do we start? It is done by lodging the idea firmly in the mind with at least as much durability as the fantasies which oppose it and which masquerade as fact. We start by making sure that we have absorbed the statements, and that we don't just gobble them up and ask for the next piece of attractive news. Humans as demons. Remember what Rumi said, and you will see how people chain themselves with their desires, which are not the same as their potentialities. Humans are demons, and lust is their chain. It drags them to the shop and field. This chain is composed of fear and anxiousness. Do not see this creation as chainless. It pulls them to effort and chase. It pulls them to the mines and to the sea. Capacity comes before opinion. Question. Some people say they can learn through studying books, others that there isn't anything worthwhile in books, and others that they haven't found the right books yet. What are your reactions to this sort of thing? Answer. I can't do better than repeat an old story told by a Sufi. He described how at one time he looked for books and did not find them. Then he found them and thought that everything was in them. Then he decided that there was nothing in them. Finally, but only after going through all these phases, and phases they are, he realized which were the books useful to him and what their use really was. What had been wrong was his attitude of accepting or rejecting books before he himself attained the capacity to study the matter properly. He was forming opinions without first developing ordinary capacities further, and asking for things without being able to profit from them. He should have started with more common sense. Rumi speaks of people who rely upon the written word as sometimes being no more than donkeys laden with books. Why do people always wonder whether books are any good, without wondering whether they are themselves in a state to profit from them? When I was first taught this, I was given this saying, so that by calling it to mind I could again experience the shallowness of the discussions about books, as carried out in so many circles. Premature independence is the daughter of conceit. If you write the question down and look at it, you will, I think, and hope, at once see that it is not a question about Sufi learning, but about books. This person is concentrating on the idea of books, not the ideas in the books.